Good evening. My name is Genelle Moore, and I am vying for the position of Chief of Police for Lincoln, Nebraska. One of the reasons that brings me here is I was a police officer at the Lincoln Police Department for 34 years, and I've lived in Lincoln for a number of years, since 1976. I feel committed to this community. I feel committed to the department and to the officers, as well as city government. This, being a police officer and also being a chief of police in today's society, is going to be quite a challenge because of the change in culture, because of the Mr. George Floyd situation, the calls for social justice and law enforcement reform is going to be changing law enforcement across the country. So I feel that my skill set and my knowledge of the department and the officers that are in the department and my skill set, I said, would bring quite a bit to the department. So that's why I'm here. Questions?
You have been gone how long from sort of the police department? Could you touch a little bit on maybe how the culture will change, or how you might want to shift how the culture is at LPD right now? What changes you might want to bring right off the bat?
Sure. Yes, I have been gone for about 4 years. I left in March of 2017, and I have been in human resources at Lincoln Public Schools, one of the larger employers in Lincoln, Nebraska. When I talk about the culture changing, police have been looked upon for a number of years as being the warriors, the tip of the spear. But as things change, as best practices change, now police officers are being looked upon as being the guardians, being the shepherds, the sanctity of life being very important. So I'm not saying that the Lincoln Police Department needs to have major changes. We're a community-based problem-oriented policing department. We've been that since the early 70s, and we do that quite well. And I think that's why we have such support from the community. But because of what has happened, we are focusing on staffing. We're focusing on recruitment and retention, and that's going to be one of the major focuses that I will have as the chief of police for the Lincoln Police Department.
What is your stance on body cameras? And if you're made police chief, what changes, if any, would you make to have those videos released to the public and the media?
Well, thank God, we haven't had any situations that would call for, such as an officer-related shooting or some sort of incident, critical incident, where the body-worn camera footage would be released. I would obviously adhere to policies as far as the policies that have been adopted right now with the body-worn cameras. I would also take into consideration the due process of the officer. I would not immediately release the information. I would also obviously talk with the legal to see what their opinions are as far as releasing, but immediately that would not happen. We would not release the camera footage, because the investigation would be ongoing. We would make sure that we'd know how the situation occurred, how it transpired, how it ended. We have to understand the situation before we can try to explain it to the public. So I would respect an officer's due process, and it wouldn't be released immediately, but we certainly would let the public know that if there were any impending dangers or if it was safe, we would definitely speak about that immediately, but we would not release it immediately.
If you were to be named the next police chief, what would be your number one goal taking over the department?
Well, The officers have been through some great trauma with the murder of Officer Mario Herrera and with the curfew and the following the insurrection or riot that occurred after the curfew's hour of 8 o'clock or whatever it was. I would my first goal is to make sure that the officers are sound, that their mind, body, and soul is is cared for, and that's my first goal. Because if our officers are not in a recovery state, then our community's not in a recovery state, and we're not able to give full quality service to our community. So that would be my first goal. I would suppose my second goal, there's a lot of things that have happened at the department, upgrades that are very good, that I need to catch up on, to learn. I left the department as the personnel captain, so I would say right now there's probably about half of the officers I hired in my process in being the personnel sergeant and also as the captain. So there's a number of officers that I don't know that I would need to build relationships with and get to know them. That's the beauty of the Lincoln Police Department. It's the size. It's just big enough that we know everyone. So it's my goal to know everyone again.
How do you view that role of being a chief? A lot of people remember Bleimeister as very out and very available to both the public and the media. Is that a role that you want to take on, or would you prefer to be a little more behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think Chief Bleimeister did an excellent job at availing himself to the media and to the public, and running a department. I mean, there's a lot of things to balance. You know, because we're a community-based police department, my expectation would be to have the leadership team, my captains, assistant chief, to be also involved in that. We have a lot of educating to do, just judging from the things that people have been saying after the George Floyd situation. Really, our citizens not knowing what the police department does. So it's our job, the leadership team's job, to make sure that we are able to prioritize. I mean, of course, I will be going out, but I can't go to every meeting. So, you know, I may have to prioritize and tell somebody I'll be at your meeting in 3 months. But if you want somebody now, we can send Captain so-and-so. So it's a matter of sharing, and that's how you build leadership. And, you know, we're in succession planning. I'm not going to, if in fact I am the chief of police, I won't be there forever. And I would hope that this would be building some experience for the next police chief.
If you were police chief, this has kind of been talked about across the board in different areas. Would you be an advocate for having a mental health professional be a part of the police force team,
Yeah.
go out with the police to certain situations and events where somebody with that training may be able to help de-escalate a situation before it may end up getting out of control?
That's a good question. I was at the department today and kind of spoke to them about that. You know, there are some calls for service now that we found out during COVID that no suspect, low loss, those kinds of things, that they were taking over the telephone and they weren't sending someone out. And it was still getting documented. And if in fact somebody wanted an officer to come out, they would send an officer out. So it would be my idea to first maybe look at some calls for service that we can turn over to a call taker. And as far as the mental health goes, you know, I remember a call for service when I was working the street. It was up in Northeast Lincoln, and it was a gentleman who was experiencing a mental health crisis, but he was not being a threat to himself. He was not being a threat to anyone else. He was very calm. We went there and we spent probably about an hour and a half or so talking with him, just talking with him. Calls like that or calls that a mental health practitioner could probably take. So my idea is to sit down with my leadership team, and with mental health professionals, and kind of talk about, and probably even Pat Condon at the county attorney's office, and talk about how we can facilitate that in a safe way, write a policy, and come up with ideas of how we're going to vet those calls. I mean, are there keywords that the people that we're going to be looking for, that we would maybe send an officer instead of a practitioner? Now, of course, if they're in danger to themselves, they're causing a disturbance, they're threatening others, that is something we would definitely send an officer or two to take care of. So yes.
You were the first Black woman to be hired as a police officer. You mentioned in an article a couple of years ago how you had to have thick skin back then. What would it mean to be named the first Black woman to be police chief of Louisville Police Department?
I think back when I was an officer and I went to Mickle Middle School. And I was going there to talk to, a class of middle schoolers. And as I was getting out of my cruiser, I had parked in the front. As I was getting out of my cruiser, I was walking in, and this little African-American girl stopped. I mean, I will never forget this. It was like it was yesterday. Stopped and looked at me like she was looking at the second coming of the Lord. And, I stopped and talked with her, and she said, I didn't know we had a Black female in the police department. And I'd been on the department for a while, but I'd been on nights, and then finally I came to days, and I was a youth aid officer. And we had a conversation about, she said that she might be interested in being a police officer, and we had a conversation about that. So, and I ended up hiring her years later when she was, wanting to be a police officer. So I think it's going to be a tremendous opportunity for this community. And as far as being a role model, is forward thinking, I think it would be great, and it would be good for me also, to represent, I guess, women and Black women. I think about, I may have been the first police officer, Black female police officer, but there were African American women that came before me at the police department. There was, a woman who worked in the jail who cooked, I think. There were PSOs, public service officers. I think about Donna Jones, who's passed away, who'd been there for years. It's because of those women that I'm able to be here. So I raised them up also.
What are your thoughts, on use of force training and retraining for officers?
Well, the more training that you can give your office, quality training that you can give your officers in those areas, and those are critical areas, the better. And we have lethal force instructors that are extremely well trained, following best practices, following policy. That's something that we don't call it use of force. We call it use of control techniques, because really that's what it is. It's controlling an incident to a successful end until the person stops resisting. So it's important, and we do it often. Actually, the officers get 2-hour trainings quite often for that. But we also need to have those soft skills trainings like de-escalation, decision making, where I don't want to call it shoot, don't shoot, but decision making where they really do have to take the time, maybe take cover, maybe get resources in. I think about in April, Sergeant Cooper had his officers took a call for service on Sheridan Boulevard with 2 men, one shooting off a handgun. And the officers got there, one man ran, and the man with the gun stopped. They asked him to put his hands up. He had one hand up, the other in the waistband, and that's where the gun was. Well, they did an excellent job of talking to him, waiting, expanding the time. And when you expand the time, you're expanding the success of a situation. So It ended very well. No shots were fired. He was taken into custody. The gun was loaded. So we have a very good police department here in Lincoln, Nebraska, decision making.
We have time for one more question.
When it comes to something like recruitment, it's something that departments struggle with nationally. Does a turnover for a new chief bring more opportunities, especially one that's diverse and a female? Do you think that will be helpful in maybe attracting a market that Lincoln hasn't been able to pull in before?
That's a good question. You know, marketing, you said the word, marketing. We do need to market that. My face needs to be out there. My hope is that we will get more women, and we will get minority women, and not just black. I'm talking about across the board that are qualified and wanting to serve.